The old story goes that the miserly merchant had a large mansion in the center of town where he hoarded all of his wealth. He gathered as much food and luxury as he could to himself and never shared it with his neighbors. One particularly harsh winter, as the rest of the town struggled and starved, this greedy merchant sat by himself alone in the mansion, refusing to help his neighbors with so much as a single slice of bread. The town did their best, and one day decided to host a feast to try to push back against the sorrows of that season. They gathered tables together and served a feast of pine cones and what other small, barely edible things that they could find. Of course, no one invited the merchant. He had refused to help his neighbors. Still, as they gathered and began to laugh and sing, one small boy, filled with some hope in his spirit, went to the merchant's mansion in hopes of persuading him to join the festivities. But when he arrived, the door to the mansion stood open and no one was home. The curious town arrived and explored the mansion. The merchant was gone, vanished completely, but set out before them was a beautiful feast of all of the food the merchant had refused to share. Suddenly the celebrants had cause to rejoice, as a true meal was before them, and the town gathered in the merchant's mansion to enjoy the fine feast. That evening, as the townfolk went back to their homes, one youth among them was not satisfied by the outcome of the evening. Sure, the town had had a wonderful meal, but this terrible merchant had been so cruel to his neighbors, he deserved to lose more. Glancing around the home, he saw a beautiful bauble sitting on a shelf, and he reached over and took it, intending to swipe a little bit more wealth from the person who had been so cruel to his neighbors. To the poor youth's shock, that bauble turned into a lump of coal, and suddenly a terrible goat-like figure rushed out from the fireplace, grabbed the youth, and threw him into the basket over its shoulder. This is just one legend of the creature known as Kraumpus. Today, we're going to talk about Kraumpus and how you can use him in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Merry Christmas, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who promises I will not be serving any coal with today's video, as long as you're on your best behavior. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today, we are returning to my Monsters of Myth series, where I take a look at some of the unique creatures featured in the book Lost Omens Monsters of Myth for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Earlier this year, Monsters of Myth was released, and unfortunately I didn't have a chance to properly review the book. Back in October, I spent some time looking at a few of my favorite monsters from this book, but there was one monster in particular that just wasn't right for Halloween, and that was Kraumpus. Yes, Paizo has given us their own take on the old Christmas legend of the goat-like tormentor of those who do not understand the charity and joy of the winter holidays. So today, we're going to take a look at what Paizo tells us about Kraumpus and see what players or storytellers might gain by using Kraumpus in one of their stories. So let's keep that holiday cheer coming by remembering to do all of the YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, check out my free Discord and my Patreon, and as always, jump down into the comments section, leave your thoughts, ideas, and observations, because I'm not joking, the best gift that I get with this job is interacting with you. I love to hear what you have to say. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So today we're talking about Kraumpus, and like I do with any of these Monster of Myth videos, I'm going to be dividing it into a couple of sections. The first section is going to focus on common lore associated with Kraumpus, as well as some of the content that Paizo gives us that player characters might find intriguing or be interested in using. After that, I'll move into a storyteller-focused section that is going to talk a little bit more about the story of Kraumpus and how a game master might use them in their games. Before I get to that section, I will give a spoiler warning so that players don't have to worry about ruining the stories they might encounter. But today, we're going to be talking about Kraumpus. And the first thing I want to say on Kraumpus is, yes, there are real-world legends surrounding a figure called Kraumpus. And we are not talking about those real-world legends in this video. Paizo has taken something that exists in the real world. They have taken these stories that we know and are familiar with, and they have given us a Golarion spin on them. So today we're going to be looking specifically at how Kraumpus is presented in Pathfinder 2nd Edition in the Golarion setting. The Earth-based lore of Kraumpus is not really going to figure into this video, but if you as a storyteller or your gaming group likes the idea of Kraumpus, by all means go and check out some of the other stories, because that's just going to give you more inspiration. But just be aware, for this video, we're taking a look at the Paizo-specific Golarion-focused take on what Kraumpus is and how he might impact your stories. In terms of his appearance, Kraumpus is a large, goat-like humanoid that runs around with manacles and chains and carries a large basket over its back, sometimes a large bag of goodies instead, and essentially tries to capture those who are naughty as a form of punishment for those who fail to understand the charity and joy associated with winter holidays. And if this introduction is not subtle enough for you yet, yes, this is basically a cruel twist on Santa Claus. But Kraumpus is a pretty well-known and pretty straightforward figure, and from there we can talk a little bit about what player characters might find interesting when it comes to Kraumpus. And arguably the thing I think most player characters are going to be the most interested in is Krampus's bountiful bag. It is a giant bag of goodies containing all sorts of consumable magical items, from the simplest healing potion to some of the most powerful elixirs in the game. And anyone can try to reach into this bag, imagine something that they need or would want, and try to pull it out. And let's be honest, storytellers, every single player character ever is totally reaching into that bag. Who cares that there is a roll that goes with it, and who cares that there is a very real chance that instead of pulling out whatever you were aiming for, that you might get a beautiful golden rod instead. Don't worry, I'm sure that can't possibly come back to bite you players. It's perfectly safe. Hey look, it even pins to your shirt and you get to keep wearing it. But with that out of the way, it's time to talk about the storyteller-oriented content associated with Kraumpus. So if you're a player watching this video, I would encourage you to pause the video here and save yourself from potential spoilers. But definitely send your game master this way so that they can learn a little bit more about Kraumpus and how to use him in a game. Who knows, you might be encountering Kraumpus at your Pathfinder 2e table this holiday season. Now, storytellers, in discussing Kraumpus, we should go ahead and acknowledge that Paizo, kind of like some of the other legendary figures in the Monsters of Myth book, gives us a few different stories, a few different options of exactly where Kraumpus comes from or who Kraumpus might be, so that you as a game master have the opportunity to really put your spin on this creature and how it's going to impact your stories. They give us a couple of explicit options for where Kraumpus might come from, and then there's kind of a third option that they throw out there that if you read between the lines I find particularly hilarious, but we'll get to that one. And as a storyteller, you can use any of these three, or you can come up with your own origin for where Kraumpus might come from. Thematically though, they do give us a very clear picture of what Krampus is intended to represent. According to Paizo, winter holidays are a celebration of community and charity that helps people to get through what would otherwise be a difficult and demanding time of year. It is in the common humanity of society that people are shielded from the harsh realities of things like the depth of winter. However, anytime you have a large gathering of communal goodwill, there will always be a few people with a miserly spirit, a few people with a bitter root that detests the idea that they have an obligation to their neighbor. And that bitter root is what Krampus is intended to represent. How easily a person may sink into envy, into greed, into a miserly attitude toward their neighbor, and might be consumed by such a dark attitude. Krampus is a not-so-subtle mythological takedown of those who don't understand why compassion is so valuable. Once you understand the purpose of the story of Krampus, every origin that is offered for Krampus all comes into focus as you understand exactly what the story is trying to tell you. One of the origins of Krampus is the story that I shared at the very start of this video about the miserly merchant that refused to help his town. Now, whether that miserly merchant became Krampus or was merely Krampus's first victim, that story highlights the idea that Krampus exists as a form of judgment against those who do not care about their neighbors, and in the final story of the bitter youth, highlights the fact that even those who may have been the victims of cruelty may in turn become cruel and themselves fall under Krampus's judgment. Where that first village might have been, who that first miserly merchant might be, we don't know, but that story is a clear indication that those who are not compassionate towards their neighbors run the risk of being on the wrong side of Krampus's judgment. A second origin that is offered as a possible where Krampus might come from is that a Druid circle was attempting to summon some sort of first world creature into this world and made a mistake in some fashion, bringing Krampus here instead. Now, in this story, because Krampus is explicitly of the first world, he is also explicitly inhuman. His form, then, is a dramatic reflection of the inhuman actions of those that Krampus judges. Exactly who the Druids were that might have called him, exactly how their ritual was corrupted, we don't know, but you see the picture of a community that sees their purposes go astray and inadvertently brings this terrible being into the world who serves as a judgment against those who do not care for their neighbors. Now, those are the two relatively clear stories that Paizo offers for where Krampus might have come from, but if you read Lost Omen's Monsters of Myth closely, Paizo kind of sneaks a third option in there, in that Krampus is associated primarily with winter holidays, with winter seasons when food is much more scarce. And when you think about Golarion and you think about winter, there is one location that comes to mind, Irison. And Monsters of Myth does note that Krampus is heavily associated with the nation of Irison, and if you're wondering why this is a secret origin story of Krampus, well, let's just say that Krampus would not be the first thing in Irison that might have come from planet Earth. So, if you wanted to read those Earth-based mythological stories and use the Earth's version of Krampus, Paizo is basically giving you permission to do that. Now, when it comes to the story of Krampus, beyond just the mythological origins, one of the questions you have to answer as a storyteller is exactly how much of a judgmental role does Krampus play towards those who are miserly, towards those who do not care for their neighbors. On one extreme of the scale, Krampus is a harsh but relatively fair judge who is merely trying to enforce a sense of community on those who are ignoring their obligations to others. However, the more common interpretations see Krampus as an evil and bitter spirit that just enjoys terrorizing those who have fallen prey to a similar mentality. It is noted that even the most fair-minded versions of Krampus that will allow people an opportunity to redeem themselves, that it almost seems like Krampus is setting them up for failure so that he can enjoy tormenting them more when they fail to pass the test. You will need to decide exactly how judgmental Krampus is going to be, how fair or cruel his nature may actually be towards the people he encounters. His activities will be the same, but there will certainly be a scale of how harsh his judgments are based on what you decide he represents. Now, in terms of Krampus's actual abilities, Krampus is statted out in the Bestiary 3. He is a 21st level humanoid creature, large size, that comes with limited immortality, snow step, and blizzard sight, and then a couple of abilities, Punish the Naughty and Capture. Punish the Naughty kind of serves like a ranger's hunt prey, and then Capture literally represents Krampus's ability to grab people and stuff them in the basket that he carries on his back. Creatures that are in that basket can be affected by an ability called Regression, which turns them into a childlike version of themselves, representing the almost childlike and immature, it's mine mentality that some people might have. Lost Omens Monsters of Myth does offer some variant abilities if you want to switch your Krampus around a little bit. They call it the Horde Miser version of Krampus and give him 3 abilities: Thief Scent, Bountiful Bag, and Crushing Avarice. To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of these 3. Bountiful Bag can be a fun, just temptation to throw in front of your players, so I do like that. And Thief Scent, I think, is honestly an ability that the base Krampus could have. But overall, I don't think that the variant abilities are different enough to be super noteworthy. You can include them if you want. The big thing here is Krampus is a level 21 creature, meaning that Krampus is way beyond the scope of all but the most powerful of player characters to even dream of trying to face him down. To that effect, Paizo does offer some ideas and some options if you want to use Kraumpus in stories involving lower level characters. One is the idea of Kraumpus Celebrants. The basic idea here is, as the legend of Kraumpus has spread, there are some people who have become obsessed with the legend and, around the winter holidays, will dress themselves up as Kraumpus to go around and torment those who they believe are not doing their part in the community. It doesn't take much of a stretch of imagination to see how that sort of behavior can become quite bitter and might actually draw the attention of Kraumpus himself, and Paizo does note that sometimes one of these celebrants may actually be possessed by the spirit of Kraumpus, taking on the stats of an 8th level humanoid creature known as a Kraumpus Celebrant. Kraumpus Celebrants come with abilities like Frightful Parade, Relentless Torment, and an ability called Vandal, representing the fact that their bitter attempt for revenge has ultimately twisted their own heart and is causing them to harm the community around them. Now, the typical Kraumpus Celebrant, at least according to the book, is only trapped in this form for about 1 day and 1 night, but given the damage that they do, these celebrants who have been possessed are often slain by their community or driven out by their community before the end of the holiday. Another way that you might involve Krampus in one of your stories, at least indirectly, is through the test of the golden rods. Sometimes a creature may earn the attention of Krampus, but is not necessarily ready for judgment for one reason or another, and Krampus will give them an opportunity to redeem themselves. He will present them with a golden rod, a tiny memento that will pin to their clothes and that they must keep with them for the next year. As long as this pin is on the person, Krampus can see and hear and know everything that they're doing and can keep track of their behavior, and for that year he judges them essentially according to the good tenets of a champion's code, with an additional tenet added on that the possessor of his golden rods must not steal or attempt to harm someone through theft. Every time the person wearing the pin breaks one of these tenets, one of the 5 rods on the memento goes dull. At the end of the year, depending upon how many pins remain bright and vibrant, aka depending on how good the person has been, well, there may be several outcomes. Extremely well-behaved people may find themselves rewarded with treasure, while badly misbehaved characters may find that Krampus shows up and carries them off to fates unknown. And allow me to be honest here, I think every storyteller ever knows of more than a few player characters who would probably be terrified to have the test of the golden rods pinned to them. But all of these things taken together give you some different ideas on how you might incorporate Krampus into one of your Pathfinder 2e games. He makes for a fantastic story beat in and around winter holidays, either for a real-world Christmas gaming session at your table, or if it just happens to be near a winter holiday in your current campaign, whatever the case may be. Krampus is one of those figures that can very neatly drop in and around winter holidays and serve as a nice added element to your campaign. He can appear and vanish very quickly, and that's part of the fun of using Krampus in your stories. Now, when it comes to low, mid, and high-level campaigns, there are a variety of ways that you can attempt to use Krampus. For low-level campaigns, Paizo recommends that your players be given an opportunity to help someone who is undergoing the test of the golden rods. Essentially, helping that person learn the sorts of behaviors that will protect them from being harshly judged when the next winter holiday rolls around. Or, if we're being less subtle here, having one of your players undergo the test of the golden rods themselves. At mid-tier play, Paizo recommends giving players a quest to assemble wards or gather information that can protect a village from drawing Krampus's attention. The players might need to travel to the first world and gather special wards or special elements that can be placed around a town to ensure that Krampus does not show up to judge the people who are inside of the town. And who's to say that Krampus wouldn't be watching what the PCs were doing and judging their own motives in attempting to protect such a town? And then, of course, at high-level play, you finally get into the realm where player characters might be strong enough that they could confront Krampus directly. Now, Krampus does have limited immortality. He will be reborn if he is slain, so it's not so much about defeating Krampus as it is trying to find a way to capture or banish Krampus so that he cannot torment people anymore. Also, at low, mid, and high tier play, you can add in any sort of rescuing the victims of Krampus or reversing those who have been afflicted by his regression ability. There are all sorts of save your misguided loved one stories that can be used in and around the character of Krampus, but there are definitely a variety of ways that you can get a good Christmas moral tale out of this enemy. But that's all that I've got for you today, so let me turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about Krampus and about Paizo's take on this classic Christmas legend? Have you used Krampus in one of your games? Or would you like to use Krampus? If so, jump down to the comments section and let me know your thoughts. As always, don't forget to do the other YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, check out Discord and Patreon. All of that stuff helps to support the channel. But as a genuine expression of Christmas cheer, allow me to say, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.